Our system needs us to be good, little, obedient robots. And this book says, F that. Today, I want to tell you about Beyond Anxiety by Martha Beck because I finished reading and I was bawling. The basic idea of the book is that your number one priority is to calm your anxiety so you can build a purposeful, unconventional life instead of submitting to the roles that we feel forced to play in our society. While it might look like a cheesy self-help book, I find that what she proposes is pretty quite profound activism. Martha Beck grew up Mormon. She was a good little Utah girl, and then she went to study sociology at Harvard and married some dude, had 3 kids with him, and then realized she was gay. So she came out as a lesbian. She left the Mormon church. She left academia. Not sure in what order, but now she's in a throuple with 2 other women. They live with her son Adam, who has Down syndrome. He's 33 years old. And more recently, they had a daughter. She's about 4 or 5 years old. So the 5 of them are like a happy little family. She's also an author, a life coach, an animal lover, and just a sweet little weirdo. The first part of the book is all about ways to calm your anxiety. This is important because when we're anxious, we're like frightened creatures. And if we don't take care of this frightened creature that we have inside of us, it's just going to take over. It's going to drive your life and make bad decisions. That, and also when we're anxious, we contribute to society's level of anxiety at large. One of my friends is a doctor, and she said people have been increasingly mean. That makes her feel more anxious, and then she goes home and she might be more anxious towards her kids, who as a result might become more anxious as well. That's why it's so important for each and every one of us to focus on our own anxiety and find ways to calm it down as much as possible. One of the reasons why it's really hard to calm your anxiety is because it's seen as noble to be anxious. If you're not anxious in this society, you're seen as naive or ignorant. Doesn't necessarily mean that you are, but you might be seen this way. So being committed to calm is pretty countercultural. Another reason why it's so hard to calm our anxiety is the way our brains are wired. We have a lot of language, something that animals don't have, which means that we can make up anxiety-based stories that are going to make us feel afraid, as if a lion was chasing us when actually we're not in imminent danger. When our brain makes up an anxiety-based story, we see it as the only possible reality. So we refuse to consider other possibilities, such as evidence that we don't need to freak out right in this moment. In the book, she talks about how relaxing our anxiety is like the horse trainers who whisper to their horses instead of breaking them with pain using a whip or a stick. That's the way horse trainers have been taught to tame their animals for so long, but it's not the only way. It makes me think about a podcast I listened to recently where a woman was talking about growing up in a mega church in Florida, where when she was learning to raise her kids, she was told that you put the baby, like a 4-month-old, on a blanket, and when the baby tries to escape the blanket, you hit them with a stick. And sure, this quote-unquote works because the kid is going to do what you want them to, but you're breaking their essence. Now, what's really tragic is we do that to ourselves in some subtle and not so subtle ways. We tell ourselves we should be stronger, we should be less emotional, less sensitive, we should get out there and do the thing and be tough, instead of using gentle, compassionate methods that make sure that our relationship with yourself remains intact. That's what she talks about in the first part of the book. I'm not going to dig into them today because I want to get to what was most interesting for me. So once you have calmed down your anxiety, once you've left the anxiety spiral, you can enter another kind of spiral, a spiral of curiosity and creativity, which is going to bring you so much more joy and well-being. In the book, Martha tells the story of when she was diagnosed with ADHD. The researcher that was evaluating her said that she had a abnormal interest-based nervous system. And she was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Most people can direct their attention in an optimal way, and you can't really. You just focus on what you find interesting." And she was like, "Optimal for what?" And the person said, "For work, for school, for functioning in society. Personally, I can direct my attention in quote-unquote optimal ways, but every time I have tried to live this way, it makes me miserable. I feel deep rage, like I'm stuck in a cage, like my creative animal self is trapped. So I have chosen to build a life in which I don't have to do this, except for some boring tasks like filling taxes." To me, this book is a manifesto to this kind of living. Martha is urging us to make more space in our lives for this interest-based part of us. To the curious part of us that goes, "Ooh, what's that? What's this? This is fascinating." Because she says that this way you're going to naturally gravitate towards what nourishes your brain, your heart, your body, your soul. One of the concepts that explains this that stuck with me the most is what she calls making your sanity quilt of a life. Martha grew up Mormon, and around her there was lots of women quilting. They would choose a pattern, like a centuries-old pattern that already exists, and they would go buy their fabric according to the pattern that they wanted to create. Now, this is what we are taught to do. Pick a pattern. Do you want to be a lawyer, a teacher, a stay-at-home mom, a provider? You choose your pattern and then you do what it takes to get there. You just follow the instructions, and that's the life you're going to end up with. You might drag yourself through years and years of schooling in a subject that you're not interested in, just because that's what you might have been told to do, and because there's also a sense of external safety in having a pattern to copy. There's a quote I really love on page 182 where she talks about how if you want to be happy or if you want to do well living this way, you're going to, quote, "need a ton of lucky breaks. For starters, I'd highly recommend that you be born into a wealthy family. Make sure you're a white, straight, cis male with no neurodivergence, no emotional trauma, and the buff, fatless body of an underwear model. Remember to have powerful people provide you with lots of money, pull strings to smooth your way through the educational system, and set you up in a profitable career." End quote. She's funny. Yeah, if you're someone with dyslexia or ADHD or someone who's disabled, you're going to try to pick a pattern and follow the instructions, but the instructions are not going to work for you, and you're going to probably make it mean it's your fault, that you're not good enough to follow these instructions correctly, when actually it's just that these instructions were made for a very specific kind of person. There's another way of living. There's another quilting practice that's called crazy quilting. That's when you sew together random pieces of fabric that you love, and it makes this beautiful, messy quilt. You can do the same thing with your life. Pick something you're curious about, then start spending time on it. Make it a part of your life, and eventually consider something else you're curious about and see if it can fit in with this first thing, and make mistakes, rearrange until it feels good in your heart. I'm going to give you two examples, one from Martha's life and one from my own life. Martha started writing when she was 25 years old, just writing books. And then eventually she felt alone, so she was curious about writing groups. She joined a writing group. And then eventually she was writing, she was meeting with her writing group. Eventually she decided to start learning about how to get published. That's where her curiosity was leading her. So she learned about publishing, and eventually she got published. One piece after another. For me, it started with reading. I was always a massive book nerd. And then one day I stumbled upon this book, Through Hiking Will Break Your Heart by Carrot Quinn, where they go on a 6-month adventure on the Pacific Crest Trail. It's their memoir. I fell in love. I became obsessed with the idea of through hiking. I thought, of course, it's not for someone like me. I'm a dork. I'm far from an athlete, but isn't it fascinating? And I started reading everything I could on the topic of through hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail, and it consumed my thoughts until one day I had no choice but to follow that trail, pun intended, and I went to through hike the Pacific Crest Trail in 2019. When I came back, I decided to create an online course that would help people prepare mentally for something that's so hard. For other people who would let their self-doubt get in the way of going for it. I wanted to be the Brené Brown of hiking. And then one thing led to another. And today I'm a podcaster and a coach when before stumbling on this book, I was a graphic designer and an illustrator. Following the crumbs of my curiosity, like Elizabeth Gilbert says, led me into a completely different life in which I'm much more fulfilled. While you don't have to make money out of this way of living, you can. Martha and I did, and in the book, she gives lots of examples of other people who have. She writes this sentence that I really love. Quote, "Ironically, money is often a kind of side effect of releasing the left hemisphere's obsession with acquiring wealth and instead focusing on an intense commitment to our deepest creative impulses." End quote. Now, of course, most people who live this way don't end up being rich, but they will have another kind of wealth, which Martha calls the joy of chasing what nourishes your heart. Now, a caveat that's really important is you cannot take, for example, my life and replicate what I've done to get to the same results. That doesn't work. Instead, you have to replicate the same method, which is following the crumbs of your curiosity, taking them seriously, giving them the time of day, believing that there's something worthwhile in what Martha calls your little fascinations. Have you ever heard about the study that the NASA did in 1968 on creativity? It's fascinating. It was led by Dr. George Land and Beth Jarman, and basically they studied 1,600 children, ages 4 or 5, and 98% of them tested as being geniuses. Now, they followed these kids and the percentage went down. By adulthood, only 2% of these same kids tested as geniuses. We unlearn creativity as we grow up in order to fit into society. But we can relearn it. If you don't know what you're curious about or what your passion is, there's two options to explain this. Number one, you might be completely exhausted, and what you need to do first before you can feel a sense of curiosity is rest. You're going to know that this is you if you fantasize about sleeping for a whole month. Now, the good news is you're not going to need a whole month. Martha says you need 4 good nights of sleep and 4 days where you don't push your limits in order for your energy to come back above the empty level. If that's you, and I know it's easier said than done, your priority is to find a way to make this happen so you can get back to yourself. Option number 2 is that you don't allow yourself to listen to the inner nudges because you have been shamed for doing so when you were growing up. It's not your fault. It's the system that we live in that says you gotta be serious, you gotta be selfless, you gotta do your homework, stay focused. And so you don't pay attention to what you are being pulled towards. You kind of whack-a-mole your little fascinations when they show up. Your anxiety tells you it's selfish anyway. It's pointless to create a YouTube channel. Who's gonna watch your videos? Just do something worthwhile. Why are you painting? Don't you have responsibilities to attend to? This is a waste of time. And you have been taught to believe these lies. Finding your passion starts with paying attention to these faint sensations of interest. So here's 2 pieces of advice from the book. Number 1, notice what feels like a push and what feels like a pull. You can even keep a daily journal about this. I'm going to give you an example from my personal life. I remember a few years ago joining an environmental book club with a bunch of intellectuals. I was doing it because I was telling myself I should, because it seemed like a smart idea to get informed about the environment. And it was, but it felt like such a push. Like I was trying to push a squishy shape into a box. Versus recently, I signed up to a queer book club with a bunch of artists, and this feels like a pull, like it's happening in a few weeks, and I cannot wait to attend. So what about you? What have you been doing, or what have you done in the past that felt like a push? And what do you do, or what have you felt called to do that feels like a pull? Piece of advice number 2. Allow yourself to go up the curiosity spiral by going through these 4 levels of interest that I'm going to outline. Level number 1 is, ooh, wow, that's cool. Number 2 is, ooh, wow, that's so cool. Level number 3 is, I wish I could do that. And level number 4 is, I'm gonna figure out how to do that. It's like you're allowing yourself to step into the forest of curiosity, one step after another. Let me give you a few examples. Earlier, I told you about through hiking. My spiral of curiosity started when I picked up the book, and after reading a few pages, I was like, wow, that's cool. And then halfway through the book, I was like, wow, that's so cool. And then when I finished, I started following through hikers on Instagram. I started watching YouTube videos, and I was thinking, I wish I could do that. And eventually the obsession became so intense that I had to tell myself, you've got to figure out how to do that. Same thing happened with coaching. I started listening to a podcast that a friend of mine recommended called Unfuck Your Brain by Carol Lowenthal. And after the first episode, I was like, wow, that's cool. And then 30 episodes in, I was like, wow, that's so cool. And then eventually I started thinking, I wish I could do that. And then I realized that this woman is just another woman like me. And if she can figure it out, I can also figure out how to be a coach. 5 years ago, I was a designer, I was an illustrator, and my life was fine, but I was not super fulfilled. Now, if you had asked me what I wanted to do instead, I would not have known. I would have been dumbfounded. Now, today, I'm a podcaster, I'm a coach, and I have my own business. I'm much happier, but I didn't figure out that's what I wanted to do by just asking myself, what do I want to do? No, instead, I just followed my curiosity. I gave myself permission to take one step after another without knowing what the end destination was going to be. It was scary sometimes, but it was worthwhile. Before I leave you, I want to give you a warning. You will need on this journey to calm your anxiety creature many times along the way. You will get criticism from yourself, from your inner bully. You will maybe get criticism from others as well. You will feel judged because you're going against the norm. You might tell yourself, ugh, that's stupid. I should be with my kids right now. Or why am I doing this? It's pointless. I need to do something more important. No one cares about this. And you will have to bring yourself back to why it matters. This repetition, falling into an anxiety spiral and bringing yourself back into a creativity spiral and down and up again, this is what's going to build creative resilience over time. Martha says it's like washing your hands. You need to do it every day if you don't want to be infected by the anxiety pandemic. That's it for today. Go get the book Beyond Anxiety by Martha Beck. It is one that I'm going to go back to again and again. And if you liked this video, subscribe. I'm going to be sharing about my favorite self-help books from now on. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel, Self-Growth Nerds. You can also find me on Instagram at Self-Growth Nerds. And you can also listen to this on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you're more of a audio kind of person. All right, book nerds, have a beautiful rest of your day.